My name is Brian Matier, and I am the Director of Mission Engagement for the Western North Carolina Conference. And that includes local and international mission. It also includes um, disaster response, which we've been heavily involved in, and as well as creation care. So I'm having a little bit of trouble. Let's see. Let me get to the beginning. All right. So I wanted to start off a little bit and talk about kind of structure of mission teams and mission committees. They are called different things in different places. Um, so the first thing to do is to gather a team. Um, Oftentimes, our teams in churches are those that are interested in mission or are doing mission, and these are that's a good place to start informing your mission team. But I really want you to think about what the purpose is of your mission committee or mission team, and then um, as your team gathers, you want to think about your purpose and your vision. So in the top right corner, you can see the mission engagement team um, kind of vision, and it was the WNCC UMC mission engagement team cultivates, collaborates, and communicates God's mission to the local churches of Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. Yours will certainly read differently, and you might have other particular things that are you want to include in your vision, but you really want your vision to kind of state who you are and what you're about as a mission committee, and really what your church is about. It's also good to not only include mission-minded people in your mission team or mission committee, but it's also good to have other people. Make sure you have diverse voices, and that could be multicultural voices, but that could also mean people in different areas of the church, people with maybe in finance or trustees or youth. It's great to have a youth person. In fact, our annual conference passed legislation that each conference team needs to include a youth. So you want really a broad swipe of what your church is and the voices in your church. And then create a set of values, as I mentioned. Um, I wanted to share just a little bit of the conference's mission engagement values, and this will kind of give you a little bit of an example of what some of them are. So we used Wesley's "Do No Harm," um, then do all the good you can, and then stay in love with God. So this is a little bit of our vision statement and missional engagement values. So in the first "Do No Harm" part, we want to emphasize working together between volunteers from outside and residents of a community in order to help prevent dependency by being limited to one-way giving in emergency situations. We also want to focus on emergent leadership from among the affected community and recognize our commonality with communities whom we partner. So not only do we want to have folks just from the church or the congregation involved in our mission, but we also want the community to partner with us and the voices and leaders in the community. We want to strive to put the interest of those whom we serve above ourselves. So really mission is about it's God's mission, but it's about the people that God has called us to and God has called us into relationship with. And then we want to follow models of service that focus on relationship building and asset-based community development. So that means we're going to look at the strengths in a community and not the weaknesses. By recognizing the strengths in the communities, you will get to the areas of that need and how you can partner within communities. Prioritize communication, collaboration, and education in order to help create clarity with communities' intention and respect their engagement. And then maintain long-term sustainability of our work in communities. So we don't want to parachute in and out of communities. We want to build relationships for the long term. And then do all the good that you can. So the ways that our mission engagement team does that is by listening. Always begin by listening to those whom we seek to work with. We want to empower. The community always guides our work, and empowerment is our byword of the community, its leaders and our neighbors therein. And then we want to clarify. We want to be intentional about what the expectations are. Um, Preparation ahead of time is key by setting expectations of all parties involved. And then we recognize that mission happens in a variety of ways. Relief, which is one way giving in times of crisis or disaster. Advancement, where we have the community involved in the process. Community development, where the community help leads. By education, raising awareness about broken systems, structural change, advocating for change of broken systems, and we recognize creation care as a way that we can be in mission. In addition to mission happening in a variety of ways, we also recognize that mission happens in diverse settings. So local, regional, domestic, and international. We kind of use the Acts 1:8 scripture where we're called to be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And then finally, the third part of our value statement is stay in love with God or attend to the ordinances of God. So we are grounded in a belief that all people are made in the image of God and will strive to approach people in love because Christ has shown us love. We believe in prevenient grace and that God precedes us into communities. So we're not taking God, we're trying to go where God is always already at work in the communities that we're called to. The mission of God declares that we're co-laborers and not self-proclaimed saviors. Our mission will be grounded in Wesley's practical theology of linking personal and social holiness. We believe in participating in missions as a means of grace. Mission declares the good news of Christ to the world for the transformation of the world. And our work will be grounded in the Missio Dei, the mission of God to bring redemption to all creation. So that's the mission engagement team's values. I invite you to work with your team to find some values of your own. I'm going to paste a link to the values in the chat. You're welcome to use that and modify it, use it as a guide, whatever helps you. So a couple of other ones, other possible. I think it's good to kind of frame your your mission values in to some sort of theme. So we used, first do no harm, then all the good you can, and stay in love with God. I mentioned Acts 1:8, and then another great one is the Great Commission. So this is kind of a way to ground your work in the mission team, and helps identify kind of your purpose and where you value. So the next little portion is a little bit about mission committee strategy. And oftentimes, if we are inheriting a mission team or committee, or we're starting to if we're starting one from scratch, it often comes with kind of predisposed expectations, or sometimes ministry partners, or sometimes things that the church has done historically. So these are a couple of tips on how to move your mission committee forward if you feel stuck, or recognize where kind of God is calling you to in this time and place. So the first one is to evaluate. So we serve the community with love, spreading kindness through our actions. So what are the missions that your church are already engaged with? And I invite you to make a list with your mission committee. What are they? Are they working? Do you have lots of engagement? So these are some of the questions that are important to ask of your mission committee in your church. So make a list, the ones that you're currently doing, and then also make a list of where you feel like God may be calling you. Then the second thing is create criteria. The criteria that is utilized to help you select mission partners or help you to decide where God is calling you to. So, where is God calling you in this time and then this place? So, some of your criteria may be we need X amount of volunteers serving in this particular mission. We need financial buy-in. Um, we may need multiple church engagement. So not just your church, but other churches. You might have specific kind of things that you're interested in as a congregation. It could be ministry around homelessness or feeding ministry or all sorts of things, housing, um, social justice. So kind of create a list of criteria by which you want to, you know, um, evaluate your mission that you're currently doing and that you tend to do. And then finally, communicate and reassess. So once you've selected missions to work with, or you've identified those ones that you really want to focus on for a certain length of time, communicate that with your congregation. And then you should always be kind of in an evaluative process. You should always be, reassessing after a certain level of time. Is this still what God is calling us to now in this time and in this place? We had a bunch of people in the waiting room, so I'm going to let them in here. All right. So here's a little bit deeper on the evaluating your current mission. So again, assessing your current mission partners. How has your church been engaged? How many people are active in the certain mission? And what is the history? I think this is a really important one. What's the history of the church with a particular ministry? Um, Try to learn that history, try to talk with and connect with people that have been involved with this and see how it gets started. What's important to the church about the history of this particular mission offering. Then you may want to hear from your congregation. So it shouldn't be just about your mission team or mission committee making all the decisions, but you want to hear really what from the congregation. So I would suggest that you create a mission survey to glean information. Um, so, what is it that the church really feels is important to be involved with? And then you also may want to, along with that, offer a skills assessment for your members. So, you may have people in your church with specific skills that would be important to the ministry that you're called to. So, um, having that and knowing that is really important as you enter into mission with the community partners or internationally. And then also you need to connect with the local community. So if you've identified an area that you feel God is calling you to, or to a mission that God is calling you to, it's really important that you're entering into regular conversation with the community. So again, we don't want to go in and say, "Hey, we're here to fix the problems within your community." Just think about how that might feel to someone coming into your community. So start with the strengths. Uh, Try to find those key leaders in communities or key leaders within organizations. Um, and then what is it that your community needs? Or a better question is, what is it that your community is asking for? Um, so don't assume what they need. We need to ask and we need to be invited to be involved with a particular area. And then pray together, gather together, seek guidance and strength, and ask again, where is God calling us to now in this time and in this place? This is an important one. We've all got these. Most of you probably know what these are or have identified these, but it's important to really know what the sacred cows of your congregation are. Um, Sometimes these sacred cows can be good, and sometimes they can be detrimental. But it's important to know these things. That what is it that is really, really important within your church, and that if you were not to do it, would be really detrimental, and you would have a lot of adversity of not doing it or doing it at a lesser rate. One of the things I like to say is honor the tradition of the present and the past while not being held back by it. So tradition is important, history is important, um, but also we believe in a living God, and we believe that God moves, and our churches should move at the same time. So we want to honor traditions of mission and ministry of the present and past, but we don't want to be held back by it because God may be calling you into something new. Um, so again, having understanding those golden calves, understanding those um, where God is calling you to now, and being present within communities. And then here's a little bit of a checklist that I created of things to think about when you thinking about mission criteria or mission partner criteria. So on the left side is kind of internal of the church. So identify what's important, establish the thresholds, understand your identity. So, what is it that your church is about? What's the assets of the church? So, not only are you assessing assets within communities, your asset understanding the assets in your church, and then create realistic expectations. And then on the right side are program criteria for a partner organization. So, coordinate or a community. You want to coordinate with local partners. I think one of the things that sometimes can be a pitfall for churches is we feel like we need to create something new. But oftentimes there's organizations or groups that are already doing the types of things that you want to do with your congregation. So partnering with these organizations is a great way to be in ministry and also be um, connected within communities. So again, ask the partner what's needed and seek two-way reciprocal partnership. So our mission shouldn't be one way. It shouldn't be us to them or us to some group of people. It should be reciprocal. So we should be learning from each other. We should be uh, our groups and our communities should be also pouring into us, and we need to enter in relationship in a spirit of learning and relationship. So don't be the one only the church shouldn't be creating the goals themselves. It should be shared created goals. And then again, we want to deliver on what is promised. We want to uh, under promise, over deliver is always a good way to think about how we're involved in mission. So again, and then finally communicate and assess. Um, Communicate with your church and with your partners what you've done, celebrate, and then reassess what worked, what didn't work, what we could do better. Are we still called to be in this place and in this time for this particular mission, or is God calling us to something else? And then finally, the place God calls you is the place where the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So at this time, Reverend Laura Elliott, she's going to hop in and share the second section of um, our time together.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to be with you this evening. I recognize many of you and have worked with different ones of you in missions, and so I'm delighted to be here. Um, are you going to continue to show slides, Brian, for me?
Yes, I will. Are you ready for those?
Yeah. So we are going to focus on local missions, as Brian has already been doing, and I'll try to pull in some things related to, a little bit to global missions as well, how they might complement local missions. I'm the chair of the mission engagement team. That's a group of people from around the conference who help support the work that Brian and other staff members do at the conference office. And so I wanted to start my portion, next slide, Brian, with some of the information from the United Methodist Discipline. And this is straight from our brand new 2020-2024 discipline. And it just sets the framework for why we do missions and for the expectation that we will do them in our local churches. The mission in the world, as stated for our United Methodist denomination, includes that we are sent into the world to engage related to justice and reconciliation. We want to make sure that we're helping to show the love of God for all people, regardless of their status or background or anything else about them. And the primary tasks within that mission include organizing an adequate provision for basic responsibilities and planning in every local church, a program of nurture, outreach, and witness. And so this demonstrates the direct connection of what we do, setting up a committee for nurture and outreach and witness, and how that specifically carries out our mission in the world as United Methodists. The next slide, Brian, goes into even more detail for how that works, that each local congregation will set up this comprehensive program. And then in the final paragraph from the discipline that's mentioned here, that some of the areas to look at relate to compassion and justice and advocacy. It includes how the church relates to society or to the community. It might include global ministries, might include working with higher education and campus ministry, which is young people, um, focusing on health and welfare, and on Christian unity and interreligious concerns, how religion and race and the status and role of women and other concerns play into what we decide to do in the community. And so the next slide, Brian, will help us go into some detail about how to go about developing this. And I'll try to concentrate on some of the specific items on this list. Some of them are similar to what Brian has already covered, but starting with prayer is definitely always the best thing to do and anything to do in our faith tradition, of course. And so you want the people who are working in mission from your church to feel that they're invested in this, that it came out of your church organically, that it's something that people are called by God as a congregation to do. And so, some of the things that you can also consider in this process, in addition, of course, to prayer, are what are the needs and concerns in your community? What's your context for ministry? What is the social location that you work and serve and worship and go to school and so forth in? The mapping of assets Brian mentioned this, and it is important to look at both, particularly if you're looking to serve an at-risk community or a community that's suffering in the margins. There are always things that they have to offer, as well as the things that it may appear that they need. And so assessing both of those is really important. The positive part of mapping assets and looking at it from a community development standpoint, what is the potential for this to improve the lives of the community? What is it that people feel called and can be recruited to do? Again, you've got to have some people available for a particular mission project. I'm new, for example, as the clergy person leading my congregation in Gaston County, a 2-point charge. And I am right in the thrall of this, of looking at the ministries that were already existing when I came in this past July, evaluating them, seeing who's behind this, and basically making it happen. You always want to have those human resources available. As a pastor, for example, I can't just go in and say, okay, this is what I think I'm called to do, and make sure that my folks can go along with it. I need to know what they feel called to do and where they're willing to get engaged. I think looking at spiritual gifts, talents, and interests, the professional background of the people who are interested and involved in missions. This is something I'm getting ready to do with my church now that I've been there for half a year. We're going to be doing our Lenten study starting in March on spiritual gifts and evaluating those things. Maybe you've never had a spiritual gifts inventory. Maybe you've taken them many times, but asking people to look at this, you can get a lot of those types of inventories online and help people to evaluate their spiritual gifts and then see how those work together to make the body of Christ, as we say. And I also, when I do spiritual gifts inventories, also inventory the backgrounds that people have. What professions are in your congregation? Do you have a lot of teachers, a lot of educators, a lot of people who are interested in young people? Maybe you're wanting to do a ministry that will impact children and youth. What are the talents that people have? Maybe you have people with specific musical talents, or people who are artists. I have gotten to know really well a person in my congregation, my new congregation, that's an artist and has taught art in the community, and how that can, inform what we choose to do in the church in terms of outreach and missions can be very significant. So then, I guess financial resources is always one of the key things, but it doesn't have to totally drive what you do. Certainly evaluating your financial resources, what other potential resources you may have access to, are very important. But we don't want that, to always be the bottom line. Otherwise, we're in a different business than what we say we are as persons of faith. One of the things that I'll put in the chat as we move toward the end of the presentation is a link that has the list of all the community foundations in our state. Most counties have at least one major community foundation. Other counties might have a number of foundations that you can look at as far as the potential for getting grants. I know that churches are usually mostly focused on our tithes and offerings, but often, and you may have already been doing this in your congregation, there's needed to be outreach beyond that to say, okay, how can we bring additional financial resources to bear? And community foundations are one of the best ways to think about that. There are also a lot of private foundations. So it's a matter of researching and seeing what's available in your community that might be able to supplement what you put forward in missions in your church budget alone. The time frame for making decisions is also something to keep in mind. The example I put here was, let's say you're talking about starting a new mission ministry in the month of May. You want it to be education related, but evaluating whether you have the time you need to start it in the fall, let's say when school starts, or is it better to wait until January, the second semester of the year, or just be realistic. At the same time, we can sometimes talk things to death and go on and on about whether it's perfectly situated to start a mission ministry. I think there's a balance between starting at a appropriate time when you have enough bandwidth and space to get it started properly, and kind of balancing that with maybe is something you talk about and talk about and talk about and never really pull the trigger. So I would love to see that balance taken into consideration. The next slide I have, Brian, talks a little bit about things to do like partnering. Brian really talked a good bit about that. I also recommend that people partner not only with other churches and nonprofits, but also look at how you can connect with city officials, county officials, people in your school, maybe the school board or something like that. I have always worked with mayors and city council members and people who are active in the community in some way. It's a civic engagement type component that sometimes gets overlooked. Let's go on to the next slide. And one of the things that I have tried to do when we've done this type of training is to focus in on categories under some major areas that most churches often get involved in. One of those, of course, possibly, I don't have this as a scientific study or anything, but I would say it's quite likely that the thing that almost all churches are involved in some way or other, is food insecurity. And so looking at, having a food pantry or a food bank in your church, possibility of serving a community meal. One of the Fresh Expressions, which is a new initiative and movement in the United Methodist Church that we talk about a lot, are dinner churches. And so that's a type of community meal. Having a soup kitchen, those are often connected with homeless shelters where you feed people and then also sleep them overnight. A community garden is one of the most, I think, popular new initiatives in recent years to enable folks to grow fresh food that can supplement a food pantry or a food bank and provide, a lot of really good nutrition in that way. In terms of homelessness, sometimes that can be a little overwhelming to think about. I put on there as the second bullet, your church as housing. Here in Gaston County, where I'm serving now, we are helping with a shelter that is actually taking place in First United Methodist Church in Gastonia. They were called upon because the Salvation Army closed here earlier this year, or last year actually, to be the location to house people for the winter overflow shelter when there are more homeless people who need to come in at night because of the cold weather. But above that, what our church is doing, we're not housing homeless, but we're volunteering at the church that is. And there's also a really great movement that I hear a lot about and have participated in, you may also be familiar with, and that is to create kits for the homeless. pack up things that you think that they might need. And you might even just, when you're driving around and you see someone who's holding a sign in the median, to share that with them and, give that out. We're going to make packets for the night when we volunteer at the shelter and give the people those to take with them when they leave, so they'll have something for the day. The one that we have a very specific program for in our denomination, you may be familiar with, is dealing with children's education and enrichment. And that's the program called Congregations for Children, or C4C. And I'll put a link also to that. There's a really good description and information about how that works. This is practiced both in our annual conference and in the North Carolina annual conference. So this is a statewide initiative. We have a person in our conference named Camille Roddy, who is a deacon clergy like myself. And she is coordinating that in both conferences right now, statewide. And so that's another link that I'm going to put in the chat for you. Backpack Ministries, many of you are probably familiar with those. Our church does that. And so we're providing food at the same time as we're helping children. And I think this is important for their education, because nutrition is the key to them being able to be effective at school. Brian, if you'll move on to the next slide. So these are also some additional categories, I guess you might say, of ideas. There are a number of populations that we might want to consider in making decisions about what types of ministries locally that we want to be engaged in. Again, as I've mentioned a couple of times already, your congregation might have a heart for youth. You also might have a heart for senior citizens. One of my two churches in my 2-point charge that I'm now serving really only has senior citizens in the congregation. Pretty much everybody's retired. And so they feel called to try to develop some new ministries for seniors in the community like themselves that they can, help serve. People with disabilities is always an important consideration to think about how we can serve in the community. The LGBTQIA plus community, people who are often marginalized or disenfranchised or discriminated against. How can we be in community and service to them? And certainly when you look at serving all God's creatures, animals may be something that people have a heart for, working with animal rescue and adoption. Additional community outreach categories, in addition to the 3 I mentioned in the previous slide, which were food insecurity, education, and homelessness or housing issues. Healthcare and wellness certainly is something that is a big thing for all of us. And there are people still who do not have access to healthcare, and what are ways that congregations might be able to help with that. Environmental concerns and climate change. I think that Brian did a separate workshop within this Equip and Connect program to talk about that. And that may be something your church is interested in and called to do, as far as being good stewards of the creation that God has given us and left in our charge. Being involved in civic activities, one of those that comes to mind that's not a partisan thing is something like helping people register to vote, and getting more people involved in that process, maybe categories or groups of people who typically are not. I'm involved with an organization that does that. And it doesn't have to create a scenario where the church is being partisan. Is simply saying that, you want to give everybody the right to register and then vote in the next election. There might be cultural activities in the community that you want to get involved in, like arts programs or things like that. Community safety initiatives. work with your local law enforcement to understand where there might be issues around this concern and how your church could get engaged in it. And then at the bottom, this is something many of us do. I know I have been involved in so many uh, food drives or school supply drives, or things that you just this may be something that someone who's not comfortable um, getting outside too much, outside the walls, but they can help you coordinate within the church collections of things that are going to be needed to share with people in the community. Finally, just a few additional concerns I would throw out. Brian mentioned prayer, and I think having, a lot of us may be familiar, I know I am, with having prayer teams when somebody goes on a global mission trip from your church. You leave behind sort of a guide. There's a calendar for what the team's going to be doing while they're gone, and you ask people in the church to pray. Well, do that for your local missions too. If you have a team like I was mentioning at our church, we're going to go and volunteer at the homeless shelter overnight. Have a team maybe with people who can't go and do that, but they can be your prayer warriors for that mission. Have a Bible or small group study that you do to undergird missions. One of the things that I've done in churches in the past, because I'm so involved in missions activities, is, when you have one of the things that you start in the fall where there's several different small groups people can participate in, make one of the options they can choose from to discuss missions. What's the history of missions in the Methodist Church? What are the Bible verses that underscore what we do? Like Brian mentioned some of those. Relationship building within the initiatives. What I really like to encourage people to do is move to the next level with something. For example, if you're doing backpack ministry where you provide food for kids and their families who are low income, working, from your church out into the community at the local school near you, think about how you can take the next step and start building relationships with some of those kids by mentoring them, or having the people who do the backpack ministry also go into the school and meet them if they're willing to do that. Now, we, always want to take into consideration people's privacy and, the kind of security issues that people may have, or just protecting people's confidentiality, those kinds of things. But if there are ways to build relationships and people are willing to participate, moving on to those next steps can really be a part of our spiritual formation and faith growth to develop relationships, particularly with people across lines of difference. Using your church facilities. I've actually done strategic planning with churches before where, we just have so many physical plants where a lot of the space is not being used. So what are some things that you can do? The Wesley Community Development Corporation, that's one of the entities that's part of our annual conference you may be familiar with. They do housing, but they also are helping churches to figure out how they can use their facilities to do ministry in the community, and at the same time get revenue generation from it that will help the church financially. That's something one of my two churches is getting ready to participate in one of those workshops. Advocacy and activism, aligning with the outreach initiatives that you do. This is an area where I think people want to be very careful with this because it can start to feel like it becomes political. But being able to not only help somebody, but talk about how to advocate for them with local community officials or with your representatives in Congress or things like that might be something you want to think about. And particularly in this time, as we're seeing a lot of change, we may want to to think about how we can do that again in a nonpartisan way, and not in a way that will cause controversy in your church, but it's something to think about, pray about. And then the last one I really want to focus on here in closing my remarks, and I think we're probably going to take questions. A lot of people say, well, how can we do global missions as well as local? There is incredible need in our communities. But one way I like to think about this is, for example, if you were working with the Latino community adjacent or as part of your city, or near your church or whatever, you could consider doing that, and then also helping with a ministry in a country in Central or South America. That's an alignment process that says, the folks who are right around us are our neighbors, but so are God's children anywhere on earth. And so I've done that with my work in Haiti, where I have worked with the nonprofit that I'm the director of in Haiti, and all of the ministries that we do there. But then when we've had Haitians come into the country here in the U.S. that are refugees, then I've also worked with them, with the local Haitian church in my area, and with the pastor there, and with people who are of Haitian American descent, but have been here a long time and have helped resettle those refugees. So that's just a thought to pray about as well, I think. And then always, some churches have the means to support other entities financially. Some don't. But if there is anything that you want to support, either locally or globally, a nonprofit or an NGO, where you actually, designate money in your budget to give them financial contributions. I think that's the end, Brian, of my space. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you for joining this session of Equip and Connect. We're grateful that you joined us. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you have any thing I can help you with or connect you with, I'm happy to do so.